These Walker gut ponchos are the perfect disguise so we blend in. God damn it, Carl!
Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video, I'll be breaking down and analyzing the new Robot Chicken Walking Dead special, Look Who's Walking. With that being said, warning of spoilers for the episode along with the first 7 seasons of The Walking Dead, and let's jump right into this. So this episode special has been teased since the San Diego Comic-Con back in the summer, and it did not disappoint.
Oh, I know where there's plenty of gas. Hop on and I'll show you.
Okay, let's find you a saddle.
I prefer if you ride me raw dog.
The episode takes many well-known moments from the show and adds its own twist to it, creating a nonsensical mess of hilarious clips and cutaways. Not only that, but most of the Walking Dead cast actually voices their own characters in this. Although the episode looks at classic moments from the show, we also have brand new moments with Negan from Season 7, like when Negan visits Alexandria or when Negan and Carl talk to each other in the Sanctuary. This episode did a great job at blending those moments together throughout the seasons, and it pretty much kept me laughing the entire time. Now I did say pretty much because some skits are funnier than others. While some had me laughing uncontrollably, others were slightly cringy, but that's just something that comes along with Robot Chicken sometimes. That being said, I'd like to take a moment to break down the episode and highlight all of my favorite moments of the special. The episode starts out at the US Walking Dead Museum, where this happy-go-lucky tour guide welcomes us and explains that the entire human race almost went extinct once during a horrible event known as the Walk-Apocalypse. So it seems like this is taking place in an undetermined amount of time after the zombie apocalypse has been contained and cured, let's say 60 years or so. During this museum tour, we get to see tons of interesting props from the show on display for the customers to see, so why don't we take a closer look and try to point out some of these small details and subtle nods. First off, the doors to the entrance is a nod to the famous "Don't Open, Dead Inside" doors that Rick first saw in the very first episode of the show when he wakes up in the hospital, except here it says "We're open, dead inside." But if you look in the back while the tour guide's walking around, you can actually see what looks like a Winslow helmet in a display case, which doesn't surprise me considering how infamous Winslow has become within the fandom the past year or so. Next up we see an axe in a display case, and I believe that this is none other than Rick's hatchet. If you've seen the Season 7 premiere of The Walking Dead, you know this hatchet all too well. And we also get a funny nod to the well walker from Herschel's farm in Season 2, followed by a bunch of floating skulls in the fish tanks, obviously a nod to how the governor did the same thing during Season 3 of the show. Next up, we get a quick glimpse of some kids taking a selfie in front of Shiva at Ezekiel's throne, while the other one does a dab, and I found that quite funny as well, although slightly cringy. But continuing on with the display cases, we get more famous character weapons, first starting with Michonne's katana, then Daryl's crossbow, and even Merle's fake stubby arm attachment thing. Now, in the same display case as Merle's metal stub, we also see a brown boot with something floating above it, so if you guys know what that's referencing, feel free to point it out in the comments. Is it maybe Bob's leg that the Terminus people cut off or something? I'm not quite sure. But as the tour guide explains that they built this museum to remember the people who saved humanity, we get the introduction of everyone's favorite Robot Chicken character, the Nerd. And so moving on, you gotta love the jokes poking fun at Rick, Carl, and Negan, as the tour guide gets a ton of information wrong. He calls Rick's last name Gremlin instead of Grimes, along with calling Carl a girl named Carla. He continues to mention Negan as Neagnon, explaining that he was the leader of a rival softball team, the Lucille's. So at this point the scene had me laughing my ass off, but it doesn't end there. The tour guide continues to explain that the rivalry between them ended when Carla apparently agreed to marry Neagnon, calling Lucille a wedding gift. Anyways, this is where we get the introduction to Old Man Carl, which I believe is actually a reference to a very popular fan theory and artwork. Because of this famous artwork of Carl as the last survivor, it inspired many different variations of the same theory that The Walking Dead is actually a story being told by Carl as an old man. Now, although this theory does have quite a few holes to poke through it, it's still an interesting idea, and I love the artwork regardless. So, Old Man Carl convinces the nerd to listen to the truth of what really happened, even though the nerd just seems to be interested in the gift shop.
You want to know the whole story? Do ya?
will we still have time to hit the gift shop after?
This sets up our barrage of cutaway skits, but first we get a hilarious parody of the Walking Dead opening. As the main robot chicken sings the song, we get many funny references, such as Shane's picture being placed on top of Rick's face in his family photo, taking shots at the love triangle that lasted the first 2 seasons. There's a doggy food dish with Daryl's name on it, referencing the dog food that Negan made him eat in season 7 while he was a prisoner at the sanctuary. Next up, we actually see what I assume is Glenn's eyeball on top of a piece of pizza, since Glenn was a pizza delivery guy pre-apocalypse after all. Then, while we get names of the actors who play Carol and Morgan, we see some sorry cards with flowers on them, obviously referencing Carol's look at the flowers scene. Next, we see a brush while it shows the same name of Eugene's actor, most likely referencing his mullet. I'd like to mention the fact that we see a ton of sports equipment wrapped in barbed wire, obviously making fun of Negan's Lucille. Alright, so let's finally get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. As I said, I won't be breaking down every single skit, but let's jump through most of them, some of the funniest and most memorable. During the skit with Morgan and Rick discussing if zombies remember things from when they were alive, Rick insults Morgan's wife, which is hilarious, and I actually thought that the zombie band geeks getting bullied by the zombie jocks were pretty great as well. The skit ends with a locksmith zombie who looks oddly similar to Robert Kirkman opening the door, causing Rick and Morgan to run away. Now, I never knew Michael Rooker could freaking sing until this episode, but we actually get confirmation of that as Merle gets his own song to sing on top of the rooftop from back in season 1. The lyrics got quite the chuckle out of me, and again, having the real actors voice their own characters in this special really gives it that extra spark. Moving on, I love the scene where Glenn and Rick are trying to escape Atlanta with the guts trick, but Carl starts fooling around like a moron. Another quick bit I thought was worth pointing out was the PC zombies who get offended by Rick calling them walkers. This pretty much sums up the current social standard in 2017, and I just thought it was a funny nod to PC culture.
Get ready! Walkers!
Hey, that's our word! You don't have the right!
Dale the RV King. Not only do we get a very funny reference to old-time movies while Dale jumps the gap in about every different situation possible, but there's also a comic book reference shoved in there as well, considering that Dale and Andrea actually had a loving relationship in the comics. Sadly though, it stuck in the comics and never happened in the show, which is probably why Dale is revealed to be only daydreaming about it while he's in fact getting eaten, which references how quickly he was killed off in the show opposed to the comics. Now, in one of the only cutaways that we see Daryl in, he actually takes a gun that Rick gives him and uses it as a crossbow bolt. I love small bits like this, they get the chuckle out of you that they wanted and then they move on to the next joke.
I'm out! Thanks. I'm out again!
And speaking of single cameos, in the one and only skit that we see of the governor, we can actually see him stapling a piece of scalp back onto his zombie daughter's head. Very messed up, but very much so in line with the governor, so it seemed fitting. Moving on, let's discuss the Carol Look at the Flowers scene along with all the spin-offs. So there's this famous book from 1937 called Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but it's actually the inspiration for Carol's Look at the Flowers scene. Now, warning spoilers for this 80-year-old book that most people probably read in high school, but it's a story about 2 friends, George and Lenny. Lenny was mentally challenged and would always hug living things too hard to the point of crushing them to death. The story ends with the normal friend shooting the other one in the back of the head, and that's what we see here. So back to Carol, we first see her shoot Lizzie, and then that Lenny guy, and as if that wasn't enough, she also throws in more references as she shoots Randall McMurphy from the film and movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then Tommy and the other men from the movie Goodfellas, along with the dog Old Yeller and even the audience themselves. This calls for a commercial break, and it jumps us back to the main storyline with the nerd at the museum. We see him and Old Man Carl at the cafeteria, which is themed after Terminus. We get a menu with quite a lot of puns, so let's read through them, shall we? First we have broken ribs, there's red blood punch to drink, chocolate butt pudding for dessert, which is what we saw the nerd getting, along with peppered people plates, brain food, steamed buns, lady fingers, and hot lips. This leads us to the Terminus cutaway as Rick, Carl, and Michonne all look at the Terminus sign, now with the new added point, free musical theater. So they get there and the termites break into song about how they welcome you, but they continuously mention how they won't eat you, and Rick becomes increasingly suspicious about it, although Michonne and Carl enjoy it.
Oh yes, it's Terminus, and it's a pleasure to meet you, and we're definitely 100% not going to eat you.
This is pretty great.
What a troop. I feel like they're overemphasizing that they're not gonna eat us. No, I just think they're being funny.
I love this scene, and I wish that there were more Terminus scenes, but maybe my wishes can be answered with a possible second Walking Dead special next year. With Season 8 of The Walking Dead right around the corner, it was definitely a great idea to release this special 2 weeks prior to this Season 8 premiere, as I'm just even more hyped now. This special was a very funny refresher to the series, and it left me wanting more. I'd love to see another Robot Chicken Walking Dead special in the future, and I really hope that it happens. Now, onto what's probably one of my favorite scenes out of the entire episode, the life of a walker. Here we can see things from a zombie's POV while we hear his thought process. It's very simple and mundane as to be expected, and the dumbed down voice actor just made it that much better. He's constantly hungry, doesn't feel pain or have any fear, so it was great to see his reaction to Rick's foot stomping the camera over and over again, for example.
Hello! Why is your foot in my face? I do not want to eat your shoe. I do not like shoes.
Come on, Carl.
Wait! I have not eaten you yet. I am hungry. Trip!
Moving on, as the episode gets further and further through the seasons, we eventually end up with Negan. He starts by bashing in Abraham with Lucille, but everything quickly jumps to a song about Negan and the dip that he always does. I loved this bit, and I'm so glad that they pointed out Negan's constant leaning, because it became so apparent while watching Season 7 that it evolved into a huge meme within the fanbase. Continuing Negan's presence in this next skit, him and his saviors drive off with all of Alexandria's guns, inspiring Rick to come up for a group name. Rick explains how every other group they've come across has had a badass name, such as the Saviors or the Wolves, and so he suggests his own name, Rick and the Gang. Although Michonne, Carl, and Olivia don't seem too giddy about this choice, Rick seems determined with his name as he pulls out a t-shirt with the name already on it. Now, I find this really funny because it's true to a certain extent. Our main group of survivors have never acquired a name like others have, and it's gone to the point that the fanbase just calls Rick's group the Survivors. Pretty bland, right? And to a certain extent, it does make sense because they are the ones who are capable of surviving through the zombie apocalypse, and it's also possibly referencing that they might be the group to literally survive and restart civilization, but so although that may be the case, it's still great to have because calling our main survivors Rick and the Gang or Rick and the Group is a common phrase that even I've used in my videos previously. Now, although some of the best moments were spoiled in the previews to the special, such as the origins of where Negan found his red scarf, there's enough new material to stand alongside it that I wasn't really disappointed at all. I loved watching that scene with Negan and Daryl at the sanctuary where they make fun of the A on Daryl's prisoner shirt, and although we've already broken down the Happy Glending skit, we get sort of a second part to it where Maggie gives birth to her baby. Maggie's baby is revealed to have the same Lucille wound as Glenn, along with saying, "I found you."
Glenn, I love you.
I find you.
It's a boy? It's a boy.
Does it look like Glenn?
I mean, yep.
I found you!
Oh, wow.
Is that how babies work?
Next up, I wanted to briefly mention Negan's scenes because they're still funny as hell even if you've seen them in the previews. My particular favorite is when he plays mini golf into Carl's eye socket, but that's just me. There's when he opens a beer with Carl's eye socket, and then when he just gets sucked up into it, but let me know what you preferred. Moving on to the final skit in the episode before the main finale, we have a huge parody of Superman where Lucille is actually the baby sent away from Krypton. It's pretty damn over the top, but I'm glad that they did at least throw in a joke about Rosita shooting Lucille and it being practically invincible. This causes the episode to cut back to Old Man Carl and the nerd as the tour guide brings them to the last surviving walker apparently. Old Man Carl freaks out and decides to kill it, but fails and ends up shooting the glass, letting it loose, leaving everything up to the nerd. As the nerd realizes that he's out of bullets, he turns to a convenient bullet dispensing machine themed after Eugene. Now, just like Eugene, the dispenser babbles on for a bit, and I feel like a broken record saying this, but having the real voice actors just made this so much better. I laughed my ass off when I heard Josh McDermott's voice ramble on about bullets, but what was your favorite actor cameo?
Hurry the fudge up!
The interesting thing about the history of the pinfire 38 caliber projectile, it was actually not 38 caliber, but in fact 37.5 caliber, due to the fact—
Yeah, gotta shut up, bullets!
And speaking of cameos, we get 3 more during the credits as a bonus. Chris Hardwick, Robert Kirkman, and Scott Gimple are shown in this parody of Talking Dead, where they debate whether or not this was the 100th episode of The Walking Dead. As a pretty big fan of Chris Hardwick, this just acted as icing on the cake, and when the zombified nerd pops out from behind the couch, they even throw in one more joke about how Robert Kirkman for some reason loves dick biting as the nerd starts attacking Chris Hardwick.
Yeah! Bite that dick!
That is how you bite a dick.
And so as the credits finish, even that stupid monkey card at the end was dressed up like Negan. But what was your favorite part of the episode? If you haven't seen it, I'd strongly recommend it, as it was definitely worth seeing for any fan of Robot Chicken and The Walking Dead. I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, or even subscribe for more Walking Dead Season 8 content in the near future. If you'd like to take that extra step in helping support my videos, check out my Patreon, where there's a bunch of different rewards involving the channel, such as a chance to directly influence the content being produced. It isn't necessary by any means, but it can really help in the long run. But as always, I thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
So I've been kicking around some ideas, and I think I've got it. Rick and the gang. Maybe we throw out some other ideas.
The Wham Bam Clan!
The Stabby Crew.
No! 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 We're Rick and the gang! I already made t-shirts.
Oh, no.